Shiloh Season, Chapter 15. Is he dead? First words out of Darylyn's mouth when we get back to the house. No, but he's unconscious, Dad says, and tells them what happened. What about his truck, Ma asks. Willens will send up a tow truck tomorrow. Do you think he's badly hurt, Ray? Likely so. Got a broken leg, I can tell you that. Was the bone all sticking out? Asked Darylyn. I tell you, I got the strangest sister. All I know is that the truck came down on it when it turned over, Dad says. Darylyn sticks around long enough to see if there's any more gory details, then ambles off to bed. Becky, of course, sleeps through the whole thing. Ma and Dad talk a little more out in the kitchen, then turn off the light and go back to bed. I lay on the couch staring up into the dark. I'm having this conversation with Jesus again, only I'm doing all the talking. 1 minute I hope he's listening, and the next minute I hope he's not. Help him get well, I'm saying, because I think I should, because you're supposed to pray for somebody who's been hurt. Then I find myself thinking, just don't let his leg get well enough to ever go hunting again. Can you ask God to heal things, but only so much? Next morning, a tow truck comes up from Wayland's, and people stand around to watch. It's Sunday morning, so word hasn't spread too far yet. Dad and me and Darylyn all go over to watch. Dad wants to be sure there's nothing left in the weeds belonging to Judd. Finally, the truck's up on the road again, being towed to the garage where Judd works. Truck don't look as bad as Judd did. Bet he didn't even have his seatbelt on. After Sunday dinner, Dad drives me down to David Howard's, and soon as I see him out on the porch, I run up. You hear what happened, I say? Can tell by David's face he hasn't. What, he says. You know that big pothole this side of the bridge? It caved in? Whoops, David? No, you know how Judd's truck? It fell through? No, David, let me tell it. Judd was driving drunk again last night, and his truck must have hit the pothole and gone out of control. Then I tell him how the sheriff figures it hit the bridge first, then rolled on down the bank. Judd with it. Woo, says David, and the way he says it, dragging it out, sounds like air coming slow out of a bag. We go in and tell his folks, and Mrs. Howard calls his newspaper to be sure they've got the story. David and I work at putting together his puzzle on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Takes about 2 hours, with Mrs. Howard helping sometimes, and when we're all done, all we've got is a lot of light and dark lines looking like blue burlap up close with names printed on it. Galapagos Fractured Zone, Continental Shelf, Bounty Trough, Bonin Trench. Heck, I figured there would be fish and pirate treasure chests, sunken ships on the bottom, not just lines. Mrs. Howard, though, she's pointing out the Marianas Trench on the map. That's the world's greatest ocean depth, she says, almost 7 miles deep. I'm thinking what it would be like to go 7 miles straight down in the ocean. Ma's granddaddy worked in a coal mine, but he didn't go down any 7 miles, a quarter of a mile maybe, and that's scary enough. Dad was supposed to pick me up at 4, but it's almost 4:30 when he shows up. I don't mind, 'cause Mrs. Howard gets out some pumpkin pie, and this gives me time for a second piece. When I get in the Jeep, Dad says, didn't mean to be late, but I drove down to the hospital to look in on Judd. Took longer than I thought. Doctor wanted to talk to me. What'd he say? Wanted to know if Judd had any relatives around here, and I couldn't think of a one. How is he? They operated on him last night. He has some internal injuries, like Doc Murphy said. A ruptured spleen, a couple broken ribs, left leg broken in 2 places, a fractured collarbone, a skull fracture. Still, his condition is stable. He's going to live then? I sure didn't sound very pleased. I think so, but it's going to be a while before he can go back to work. How about hunting? I asked. That I don't know, son. Then I know I have to do it. Dad, I say, I got to tell you something. I swallow. Dad looks over at me, and then he pulls the Jeep off the road and turns off the engine. Don't say nothing, just sits there studying me. I take a deep breath and tell him everything. Tell him how I blackmailed Judd into giving me Shiloh by promising not to report him to the game warden. And when I get all of that out of my system, I tell him about Shiloh and me out on the road by Doc Murphy's, and how I'm pretty sure it was Judd who took a shot at us. Didn't exactly plan it this way, but when you got 2 things to tell, one of them scarier than the other, it's a scary one your dad will fix on every time. He shot at you, Marty, he says. He shot at you and you never told me? He's so worked up he forgets all about the blackmail. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't see it would help. Just make you mad and Judd madder. I figured I'd stay clear off the road till we got this thing settled. Dad tips back his head and closes his eyes. Marty, he says finally, sometimes I'm stubborn and sometimes I'm cross. But don't you ever keep something like that from me again. Somebody takes a shot at one of my children. I want to hear about it. I want you to promise. I promise. I say quicker than he can blink. And then Dad starts up the engine again and don't say one word about the blackmail. I'm so happy and relieved to have it out and over with. I almost start to whistle. Then I figure that with the man in the hospital, half his bones broke, it's no time to be whistling, no matter what I think of him. It's the talk of the school on Monday. Everybody's heard by then, and everybody's added a little something extra to the story. You hear about Judd, says Michael Schott? Drove his truck right over the bridge and into the creek. Split his head wide open, said Fred Niles. Sarah Peters says Judd's dogs were with him, and all of them drowned, and by the time the bus pulls into schoolyard, we got Judd Travers dead and buried already. Dogs along with him. I see now the difference between truth and gossip. Miss Talbot tries to sort out fact from fancy, but because I'm the only one who really saw Judd lying inside his truck, she takes my version and says, we'll find out later what the newspaper has to say. Then she says it would be nice to make a big card and send it to Judd from our 6th grade class. The thing about folks from the outside is that as soon as they move to where we live, they want to change things and make them better. And there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, except she doesn't understand how long we've been hating Judd Travers. The room is so quiet you can hear Michael Schott's stomach growl. Fact is, it might be nice to make a card, but there's not a single person who wants to sign it. Miss Talbot senses right away what the problem is. She says that the wonderful thing about the English language is there aren't enough words to say almost anything at all. And there are enough words to say almost anything at all. And if you don't want to say something one way, you can say it another. What could we say that would be both helpful and honest, she says. We hope you get well, says Sarah, but the rest of us shake our heads. Nobody wants him driving drunk along the road any time soon. We're sorry about your accident, says David, but the truth is we're not. Nothing else seemed able to stop Judd Travers from knocking over mailboxes and backing his truck into fences. He could have run over Shiloh. Finally, I raise my hand. What about get well? I say. We vote on that. It's more like a command than a wish. Miss Talbot gets out of this big sheet of white drawing paper and folds it in half. On the outside, in big green letters, she writes, Get well, and on the inside, in different colored pens, we take turns signing our names. Some of the girls draw flowers at the ends of their names. Fred Niles draws an airplane, which don't make a bit of sense. When it comes to my turn, I do something I don't plan on, and somehow it seems right. I put down 2 names, Marty and Shiloh. By the time Judd comes home from the hospital, the leaves are beginning to fall. Halloween's come and gone. I was a pizza and David was a bottle of ketchup. Judd's black and white dogs didn't have rabies, and the county says they'll keep them until Judd can take care of his dogs himself. The neighbors on one side of Judd took one of his other 2 dogs to care for, and the neighbor on the other took the third. Still another neighbor drives his tractor mower over to Judd's and mows his grass, and Wheelin's garage fixes his truck up for him and parks it in front of his house for when he's ready to drive it again. All the dents are gone. It was Dad who drove Judd home from the hospital. Ma had shopped the day before and sent along 2 big sacks of groceries. Dad helped Judd into the house with them. Told us later that Judd was hardly a single solitary word to him the whole time, just sat looking straight ahead. Got his neck in a brace, of course, and a big old cast on his legs. Sits without turning left or right because his ribs are mending. Did you tell him we were the ones who found him, I ask. I did, says Dad, but it didn't seem to make much difference to him one way or the other. I rake leaves at Doc Murphy's that Saturday, and he asked if I know how Judd is doing. Well, Ma says there's a visiting nurse comes twice a week, I tell him. Doc shakes his head. Some people seem to have a string of bad luck they can't do anything about, and other folks have a string of bad luck all their own doing. Doc says, guess Judd's has a little bit of both. I can only think of the kind he got himself into. What's the kind he couldn't do anything about, I ask. Getting born into the family he did, says Doc. Did you know him? Knew who they were. Lived in a house a couple miles from here, other side of the creek. Mostly I heard stories from some of my patients, but the stories were so much alike that there was bound to be a little truth in them. What did they say? Mostly about how old man Travers beating his kids. They get out of line, he'd take a belt to them, the buckle end, mind you. Neighbors say they could hear those kids yelling sometimes clear down the road. Once or twice somebody called the law, but nothing much was done. What happened to them? Where did they all go? Most of the kids ran away as soon as they could, moved away or got married. Judd was the youngest, and when the others left and the old man Travers got peeved, Judd got his share of it, and the others' share as well. Then there was a fire, and that house went up like a torch. Mrs. Travers died, but Judd got out, and his dad too. But old man Travers died a week later of a heart attack. That's when Judd moved on down the road into that rental trailer. Been there ever since. Far as I know, he doesn't have a girlfriend. Hardly has any men friends either. Just him and those dogs, and the way he treats them, you could hardly call them friends. You think that a man who missed out on kindness would want to be kind to his dogs, I say. You have to learn kindness, Marty. Same as you learn to tie your shoes, Doc says. And Judd just never had anyone to teach him. I think about that a lot. All I can figure is that Judd would rather be the grown-up who does the beating, not the kid who's getting beat. Doesn't seem to realize they aren't the only two choices he's got. That afternoon, when Dad comes home from delivering the mail, I ask if maybe we can go visit Judd. I don't think so. I don't think I'd try it, Marty, he says. I've been taking his mail right up to his door so he don't have to climb down those steps to get it, and I always rap on the door, ask how he's doing. I know he's there, but he never answers. Neighbors tell me he does the same with them. You figure he'll stop drinking now? I doubt it, but I hope I'm wrong. They say a man has to reach the bottom before he stops. If this isn't bottom, I'm sure hate to see what it is. What I'm wondering is whether Judd looks in the mirror each morning and decides he can't stand what he sees. Never wanted a dog that was lame in any way. Never wanted a dent or a scratch in his pickup. Now it's him that has the scratches and bruises and broken bones. I heard a couple men talking about how Judd might get it in his head just to shoot himself, and I'm wondering how I'd feel if he did. Don't know that I'd be too sorry, because once he's well, we got the same problems we had before. Judd'll be just like he was, only meaner.